Last year was really difficult for my Grandpa Jack. First, he had a stroke in mid-May, and then our Grandma Bella got sick with the virus in September. She died a few weeks later, and it hit him really hard. I know the two of them were married, going on almost 54 years, so I can't even imagine losing your best friend after all that time together. Anyway, he relied on Mama for everything, so when she was gone, it was my dad who suggested that us kids step in and step up. Grandpa is about 76 now and not getting any younger. We can at least check on him daily, help with errands and housework. My brother Matt and I immediately volunteered. When Dad had to go out of state for work as kids, Grandpa and Mama were always there to take care of us, so this just felt like we were giving back to them. I said that I would stop by on Mondays and Tuesdays, and Matt said that he would handle the rest. I agreed to let him take the bulk of the work also because I work around hospital patients all day, and didn't want to risk getting my grandpa sick either. Plus, not to mention the drive to get my grandpa was a lot farther for me. I didn't want to tell Dad it was too much, but I did find a way for him to PayPal me some gas money in exchange for assisting Grandpa. When I got to Grandpa's property, I couldn't believe how much it had changed since the last time I had been there. There was a lot of cleanup to do around the yard, projects that had obviously not been finished from years gone by. The lawn needed mowing, and the acquired junk that was sitting around the grass clearly needed sorting through. The most striking change was the greenhouse. Grandpa had always loved his plants and been saying for years that he would eventually build one. I just never saw him doing it. The thing was fairly large, at least the size of a small house. 25 feet, maybe bigger just from looking at it. It was clear though that the greenhouse was where he was devoting most of his time now. And even when I pulled up, I could see him trotting out of the enclosure toward his main house humming. I could see from this far away that he had just been on his knees digging in the dirt, and it looked like he had cut his right hand, because he had wrapped a bit of his shirt around it to absolve the wound. When he spotted me, he waved and called for me to come help him with the wheelbarrow. "Amy, is that you? My, how you've grown," he said as he pushed the old wheelbarrow around to his tool shed. "You don't look too bad yourself," I said. I hugged him immediately, too overcome with emotion to be worried about distance protocols. "Except for this, of course," I said, gesturing towards his damp hand that had dried blood on it. "Oh, it's just a scrape," he said dismissively. "Have you been all right otherwise?" I asked, deciding not to tackle that argument right now. "Oh, you know me, I like to keep busy. Just bought myself a new exercise machine in the den, a Peloton or something. I saw it in one of those catalogs," he said. I resisted the urge to chuckle and had him guide me inside to show me. His house looked like it needed some TLC to be sure, and as he was explaining how his new machine worked, I was making a mental list of things that I would need to be doing. "So, what brings you all this way, girl?" he asked. "Well, I just wanted to come and check on you, see if you needed anything. Matt'll be by tomorrow to do the same. We don't want you pushing yourself too hard." He had this wicked laugh that reminded me of Santa Claus and remarked, "Are you trying to tell me that I'm old?" "Well, you aren't getting any younger," I admitted. He seemed a bit miffed by the idea of having supervision. I could understand his frustration. He had been in 2 wars. Why now all of a sudden did he have to be treated like a child? But I wasn't budging and he knew it. "Fine. But if you're going to stick around then, you have to obey my rules. You and Matthew both, you hear?" I promised that I would for the both of us and made a mental note to remind Matt to respect what Grandpa told me. Most of it was pretty petty stuff, like not to open his mail or don't be forcing him to eat certain foods. But then above all else, he stressed that no one but him was allowed to go into the greenhouse. Nobody in this family has a love for plants like me, and I don't want any of you to contaminate what I'm growing in there with your negative auras," he remarked. I told him that I would listen, and honestly, I intended to keep my word. I couldn't see him getting into any harm in the greenhouse, but Matt wasn't too thrilled when I relayed the information to him. He really shouldn't be bending over, moving things, or even trying to dig in the soil like he used to 6 years ago or even 4 years ago, he told me. Dad was in agreement, and I felt a little foolish not even considering any of that. I would feel bad going back on my promise, I admitted to both of them. "Well, you'll just have to. He's already hurt himself once this last week," Dad said. I recalled the bandaged hand and felt awful not realizing how dangerous it could be. Dad reminded me that Grandpa was on blood thinners, so another scrape like that could be deadly. "If you just calmly talk about whatever he's doing in the greenhouse and offer to do it in his stead, I'm sure that he'll come around," Matt reasoned and reminded me that Grandpa tended to listen to me more. I intended to do just as they had asked, but Jack wouldn't hear it. In fact, when I even suggested helping out with the greenhouse, he became angry. "You think a few simple plants are going to hurt me because of a little cut," he muttered. He was furious, and I was sure he was going to insist that I leave if I brought it up again. At least not until I softened him up a bit. "What do you have to do in there that's so special that I might mess it up?" I teased him the week after that when he was in a good mood. "No, you wouldn't believe me if I told you, girlie. It's miraculous." "Well, maybe you could show me," I asked him. I was hoping to coax him into letting me inside, but the plan backfired. Instead, he grabbed the keys to the greenhouse and berated me for even suggesting it. "Just let me go work on my plants in peace," he shouted. I was beginning to get the impression that his obsession with the greenhouse and keeping it safe was bordering on bizarre, and that only heightened my curiosity. And so I waited. Later that afternoon when he returned and I offered him a hearty meal, and we sat down to watch one of his favorite programs, Bonanza, I used the opportunity to let him relax and drift into a nap. And then I decided to go check out the greenhouse for myself. Finally, I found the right one and entered the damp hothouse. Inside it was just as chaotic as I had imagined. There were all sorts of plants, from ferns to geraniums to bamboo groves. He had a virtual menagerie of wild flora in this place, but most of it looked like it was being poorly maintained. I walked about the plastic-covered, environmentally controlled building, trying to figure out why he was so fixated on this place, when I heard something that I will never forget. It was this mixture of a high-pitched whistle and a soft scream, like a final gasp of air was hissing out of a sealed lid. It was coming from the most exotic plant I had ever seen, the only apparent living thing in the entire greenhouse. It looked like some sort of orchid, a massive, blooming blend of bright red thorns and swirling petals to bring together a strange network of gourd-shaped mouths that looked like they were used for capturing nectar. It was both beautiful and deadly all at once, and I couldn't help but be drawn to the unique flower. As I got closer, I noticed that it seemed to be moving, and I had to actually do a double take to be sure that I wasn't seeing things. When I took another step, I confirmed it. The writhing organism was actually responding to my movements. I couldn't help but to become overcome with excitement. I was no botanist, but I knew I had never seen a plant so exquisite and unique before. This was the discovery of the century, perhaps even of my lifetime. I immediately wondered why Grandpa Jack had not been keen to sell this and solve his money problems. And then I heard the sound of footsteps behind me, and I realized he was coming. Immediately, I hid in the groves behind the massive flower, watching from the thicket as Grandpa entered the greenhouse. He looked a little flustered and confused, perhaps wondering where his keys were, but then his eyes focused entirely on the flower. "Good evening, darling. I brought you something fresh to eat," he said as he moved over toward the wheelbarrow and dumped out a bag of fertilizer. Except it wasn't fertilizer at all. It looked like chopped up meat. To my shock, the plant's vines eagerly extended and pulled in the nutrients from the bloody meat. I felt like I was suddenly watching a deleted scene from Little Shop of Horrors, and I realized immediately that my grandfather was the caretaker for a dangerous life form. "It's getting harder to find strays these days. Might have to turn to other means to feed you soon," he commented as the plant finished its meal and he cleaned up. I was broken about how fixated he was on serving this bizarre carnivorous flower, trying to understand his passion. I couldn't let blinders confuse me about what I knew I would need to do. As soon as he left, I followed and decided to call Matt immediately with a plan. Whatever this thing was, I knew it needed to be destroyed before Grandpa decided to let it start feeding on human flesh and grow beyond his control. I drove away and explained the situation to Matt over the phone. I don't think I've ever known him to be so speechless, but this definitely felt like it was such an occasion. "Wow, so it's like an alien or something," he gasped. "It's not natural, that's for sure," I told him. "All right, I'll check it out tomorrow." "Be safe," I warned. The next day, I decided to go up there anyway and give Matt backup, in case Grandpa tried to cause problems. Thankfully though, his nurse was at the house giving him his weekly checkup, which gave me time to show Matt the greenhouse. When he saw the strange, bulbous flower, he admitted that he was stumped. "I've never seen anything like it, but it's certainly freaky," he agreed. "He's been feeding it meat, steak, and stray animals. I swear it's the freakiest and most frightening thing I've ever seen," I admitted. "We need to destroy it," Matt decided. He made his way to Grandpa's tool shed and ordered me to watch the door. His nurse could be finished at any time. He returned a few minutes later with a blowtorch and started it up, telling me to stand back. And then he began to burn the creature. It started to scream loudly, and I heard Grandpa holler in surprise up at the house. "Hurry, Matt, he's on his way," I told my brother. I saw Grandpa Jack rushing towards me, like the devil himself was inside him. I stood my ground and held him back as Matt kept torching the plant, trying to get every part of the bizarre creature. "No, you have to stop," Grandpa screamed. "This thing is too dangerous. You could be hurting people," I said, trying desperately to knock sense into him. It didn't make sense to me at first why he was protecting this monstrous creation. And then he said one word that made me feel paralyzed. "Bella." Immediately, I froze and he pushed past me. He tried to tackle Matt, but it was already too late. Most of the plant was withering and gone by this point. Grandpa fell to the greenhouse floor and started to sob as he frantically picked up the dying blossoms. "No, not after all I went through. No." I felt my mouth go dry as his words at last registered in my foggy brain. Bella, the name of our grandmother. This creature, this bizarre, beautiful flower, it had been her. "You, both of you, are no longer welcome here," he screamed between bitter tears. "Grandpa, whatever you were doing, it wasn't right. It wasn't natural. This couldn't have brought her back." I tried to tell him as Matt suddenly began to understand what was going on. "She was here. I heard her. She was in the soil. She had a chance to be reborn, Grandpa told us. We had to physically drag him out of the greenhouse, kicking and screaming. Matt managed to subdue him as I called Dad, and he made the decision to get Grandpa moved to a nursing home. The assisted living is for the best. He just can't care for all this anymore, and he needs 24/7 care, Dad said. We didn't mention anything about the plant. A week later, Matt and I were there to clean, still reeling from the strange experience and trying to pick up the pieces, when I decided to breach the subject by glancing at the greenhouse. Do you really think it was possible that thing was Grandma? I asked. It frightened me to no end that not only had Grandpa cheated death, but that we had possibly had a part in destroying Frankenstein's monster. I wanted to know, how could such a thing be possible? Was it even probable in our world? Science didn't make sense, but then nothing about the plant seemed grounded in the reality I understood. Even if it was, it wasn't the same woman we knew, Matt decided. I told myself that he was right and tried to push the thought from my mind. But eventually, my steps took me there and I looked down at the dead foliage and felt just as defeated and sad as Grandpa. Maybe it hadn't been as dangerous as I thought. Maybe we had been the real evils here, in a place where nature was trying to rekindle a love between two souls. Amid the ashes, as I stood there contemplating all of this, I saw the movement of a small, delicate vine, a survivor from the blaze. I reached down and touched the wondrous creation, marveling at it, and wondering if all the possibilities that it held. It rested a petal on me, and I could almost hear a faint whisper or a sigh, like it was talking to me. The next day, I visited Grandpa in the community. I told him that I was bringing a gift. At first, he didn't seem too interested, but when he saw the green buds peeking from the top of the pot, his whole face lit up. I let him hold the plant in his hands and watched as he gently sang a tune that he and his late wife had memorized to each other. I didn't have the heart to tell him that what I brought was just an ordinary houseplant, that I had snuffed out the last remnant of his devil's work the day before. I told myself it was better this way, to let him live a lie than to hurt himself or others. I told myself that I could forgive myself for killing what might have been the last of my grandmother, rather than know the secrets he used to bring her back. We all say we want the answers, but in the end, it's the lies that help us sleep at night.